So, do you remember the first game you ever played? For me, it was an old DOS game that's called Lotus. I couldn't believe that I'm able to control images on screen and move them while pressing some of buttons on our old computer we had. But have you ever thought what that game would look like today? So yeah, my name is Tadas. I'm from a company called SneakyBox, and I've been working on Atari Recharged games for over a year now. And today I would like to tell you a few things, what kind of challenges we faced while working on those, and how we managed to solve them. So first, I would like to tell you about how we started, that we didn't really knew anything about those games, about what we were doing, and how we break down a game into smaller chunks to make it more manageable for us. Next, I'll tell you about an SDK issue we had last year, and how having trust with the client helps us to find solutions to problems that seem impossible. I'll tell you a little bit how we took one of old games features, and by seeing that the feature doesn't really fit into our game design philosophy, how we managed to flip it so that it actually would. And I'll tell you about how starting a new game, after a while, we noticed that we had to adapt to new requirements of the player base, and how we did that. So, first of all, I think when starting any project, everything begins with a lot of unknowns. This was especially the case for us when starting to work on Atari Recharge series, because we never played them. We were a lot older than, a lot younger than those games. And the first game for us was Centipede. And Centipede was interesting because that's a bug running around the screen, and you shoot it, it splits into two parts. There are two bugs for some reason, and then there's a mushroom in the middle. So that was an interesting thing. We didn't really have anything like that before. And we already knew that we will have to do some homework for that. And so we played the game, and just give me a second. So, yeah, we had no experience for the games, and we knew that we will need to break this game down into basically a more understandable version, into a system that we could work on, because it was a bit confusing for us. So what we did was basically we took three elements of the game, and we started discussing about them separately. So that was artwork, that was development, and that was game design. And first off is artwork. So Atari gave us a direction initially that they wanted that the games would give an illusion that it's being played on an old CRT monitor, so there should be a lot of glow and everything very bright and colorful. And not only that, we already knew that we'll be working on 4 titles, not just one. So, and the timelines were quite short. So quickly we understood that we'll have to create some sort of artwork that could be used across all 4 titles. And initially it was quite hard thinking about the artwork, because we were constantly creating singular assets, and then trying to combine those two not always gave us the best results. And the solution for that issue came from our lead artist, Christina. She suggested to use something called stylescapes, which you can see here. And stylescapes you can imagine like a large mood board that is a lot more expanded. It uses several exemplary or very early assets of the game. So for example, our stylescapes used examples like fonts, like logos, enemies, backgrounds, decorational elements, UI, and general mood board images. And that's what we did. This gave us the ability to communicate about our idea as a single unit, not necessarily as individual assets to Atari, and it helped us to communicate our ideas better and for us to talk about them ourselves internally. And when working on these games, we were constantly referencing them back, even though we were working on different games, basically just to bounce them off. And the next pillar for us is development. Again, as I mentioned, we already knew we'll be working on 4 titles and on a short timeline. So again, we had to create a shared code base that we could use on separate projects and have it be working on multiple different platforms like PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, Atari VCS, Steam, Epic, and so on and so on. And another issue with this, not necessarily the code base, but our team was just formed just before this project. And usually at SneakyBox, how we work, we have dedicated teams that go together from project to project because they know each other, they know how what's the work ethics. But here we are, multiple different developers just starting. Imagine if you would start messaging random people on your Instagram accounts and then just offering to make a game for a year. But if you heard Jason talk just before me, that's exactly how it started. He messaged Adam on Twitter one day, and the rest is history. So yeah, there's a lot of new developers, a short timeline, and we have to create a code base shared. So what we did was we decided to code several parts of the game without necessarily touching the gameplay itself. So those were parts like UI, leaderboards, settings, localization, sound effects, music, and etc. Nothing necessarily related to gameplay, but we could easily just take those parts and use it into another game. And with that done, we quickly understood that we had to improve our process again, because a lot of developers, a lot of different styles of writing code and project management. So there were a lot of issues initially, but the solution to that problem came from our senior developer, Carolus. What he did was he took it upon himself to do code reviews every morning of the team so that the code wouldn't get pushed to the repository with bugs. And he also structured the repository itself in a way that we could work on several multiple branches at the time, not necessarily conflicting with each other's work. So that's the second pillar. And the third pillar is game design. And as I mentioned, Centipede is a game where it's being played on a mushroom field, and there are centipedes coming at you. You're tasked to shoot them down as fast as possible, so that you could survive for as long as possible, and by that you collect more score. And initially, this game design philosophy was working great for us, but we also wanted to give the player the sense of progression somehow. Because recharge titles have 2 modes. That's arcade and that's challenges. Arcade was basically this. You survive for as long as possible, and then you move on to the, and then you die and you restart. And we decided to make challenges, and challenges came to us from our 2 designers, that's Tadas and Adam, as Jason might have mentioned before. And challenges, what they are basically individual levels that are specifically oriented into a specific mechanic or a specific power-up that the players must utilize to beat that level. And also, challenges are more focused on speedrunning aspect, so basically completing this challenge in the shortest amount of time possible. So as you see here, one of the challenges is to destroy a certain amount of mushrooms in the shortest amount of time possible. And our QA guy who's been testing this game has managed to get the time down to sub 10 seconds, but I was never able to reach 15, so props to him. And yeah, we have handcrafted levels. What we also did was introduce the leaderboards to each of the challenge so that the players could compete on those challenges. They select one of their favorites or several, and then they compete on their friends. The leaderboards are either between friends or worldwide. And the last thing we did to improve progression, sense of progression, was we introduced achievements to the game, and nothing too revolutionary here, but what was interesting about it is that our designer Vidas had a great idea to name each of the achievements after one of the rock band's song names. And for the first title, we featured Blue Oyster Cult. I don't know if you know that band. Awesome. And yeah, that's a tradition that we're actually carrying out to this day. But if you want to find out which bands are featured for the next games, you'll have to play them and figure out for yourselves. So yeah, so these are the three pillars. This helped us a lot to understand the games and work on them on a more constructive way. And with this, we're able to progress a lot more efficiently. Let's talk about an SDK problem we had. So I think all of us has experienced this unknown event, something that you couldn't even predict that could happen. This happened to us last year. And last year, we were planning to go into submissions on PlayStation platform. And suddenly, PlayStation has announced that they'll be releasing a new SDK soon that all developers will have to support and upload to their stores with. And fine, okay, we knew that we don't have a lot of time to complete our ports. But if we do, we'll have to use a new SDK. The problem with that was that Unity at that time did not support this new SDK. So we were kind of stuck between not able to progress with our work because we were waiting for a new Unity version. And lo and behold, of course, we couldn't make it in 1 week. We couldn't complete the ports. So we had to ask for more time. It was definitely not comfortable and definitely not something that we wanted to do, but we really didn't have another chance. I think having open line of communication with the client is the most crucial part of development for us, because what we did was basically every week from the very beginning of the project until currently, and that will continue onward. Every week we have a status call, we go through the list of the changes we made, we communicate about problems, and we basically get on top of things. And we were communicating about this issue like in advance, a couple of weeks. I don't remember, Jason, how long was that? But we were saying that this might happen, and when this did happen, we started talking about that we might need time. And the good thing was that Atari at the time has not announced Centipede just yet, so we were still able to negotiate a little bit more time. So in the meantime, we were polishing, we were fixing bugs, so we would be as ready as possible to go into submissions and pass them. And of course, the takeaway here is basically don't be afraid to talk about your issues with your clients or your developers or even anybody basically who is involved in the project, because by having an open line of communication, you might find solutions to problems that seem impossible at first. Okay, so let me tell you about the old Black Widow. And not always, we found when working on these 80s games, not always the features that were originally there doesn't always fit into a modern setting. And I'll tell you a story about these dollar signs in Black Widow. So the original Black Widow basically is a game where the player plays as a spider who is protecting their spider nest from invading bugs by shooting them. And some of the bugs drop collectible items that give you bonus score. And these bonus items appeared in game as dollar signs, as you see here. We assumed that this was done due to the limitation of the sizes or memory or something like that, but basically just to save up on the development costs at the time. And when we looked at it first, we wasn't really sure how to fit it in because it's a spider setting, but there are dollar signs. It was really out of place. But at the time, we also knew that we didn't really want to remove that because it gave a sense of charm to the game, something very specific about the game. And as I mentioned before, our challenges system, which is more focused on speedrunning aspect, is not very much oriented to score. Collecting score does not help you progress into the leaderboard, so we weren't really sure having these dollar signs, how would that fit into our game design philosophy. So what we did was, again, our designers pulled through and has suggested a cool feature where we could introduce a game mechanic where when the player collects these dollar signs, they are progressing a progress bar right on the corner of the screen. And when it's full, the player is able to use the strongest ability in the game, which we call the deadly web. And with this ability, the player shoots a cone-shaped attack that covers the large amount of screen and destroys everything in its path. So, cool. We tested that, we liked it, and we quickly understood that we have something here, especially because this ability is most effective when used from the very edge of the screen, and the very edge of the screen is where the enemies spawn. So the player is encouraged to move a lot more on screen, collecting these dollar signs, as well as to move back to the edge of the screen, attack all of the enemies, and go repeat the cycle. So we introduced not only a new mechanic, but a risk-reward mechanic. So that's how we were able to solve this issue. And our findings are that not always removing something that is uncomfortable leads you to the best result. Sometimes approaching these challenges in a more creative or think outside the box way gives you a better result. And yeah, we've been working on the recharged titles for about, I don't know, 7 months, right? And at that time, we were working on our 4th game at the series was Breakout, and Jason came up to me one day and said, "Hey Tadas, what other recharge games do you want to make?" And that, I think, was pretty sure that we will be making a lot more games than we initially thought. So some of you may know or may not know, the 5th game is Gravitar, and Gravitar is our biggest game yet. It has 4 times the size, 16 times the detail, and all of it just works. And nods to those who got that reference, but I left out Harvard. Yeah, but in all seriousness, yeah, Gravitar was a game where the player controls a spaceship. He's tasked to navigate a solar system, land on planets, and complete very specific challenges on each planet. And those challenges include things like, for example, navigating very tight corridors, collecting pods from the very base of the ground, or dogfighting in space against other enemies, or a combination of all of these mechanics somehow. So Jason asked us to estimate the game, and we already knew that we have an opportunity to suggest something very new. And as I mentioned, what's new about a space shooter? I think we've done a couple of those. So first 4 titles of ours were all played on a single screen, meaning the camera doesn't really follow the player. What we did want was to give a sense of scale to the player that we didn't have before. So how we did that is basically, again, breaking down the game into those 3 pillars. Let's talk about artwork first. So our designer, Christina, again, started doing some concept work on the 4th title, and She came with several environments that could represent the solar system itself, and one of them caught our eye immediately, like the very first time we saw it. It was a huge sun that was spanning for a larger amount of the screen, more than you can see or fit in, and the player is a teeny tiny spaceship just flying around trying to find planets to land on. So we thought that we really liked that. It gave a real sense of exploration and scale that we didn't have before. And when we got that down, we moved over to the other planets. And yeah, I'll show you. That's the artwork that originally was chosen. And yeah, moving over to the planet side levels, we had those three main challenges on top of those planets. So it was navigating through corridors, collecting stuff, or dogfighting. So we chose three environment styles. So the first one was the tunnels or underground levels. Basically, there's a lot of stalactites, stalagmites. You're underground in the rock formations, and there are cracks in the backgrounds, basically giving the illusion that the light is seeping through. And that was our tunnels environments. The second one was landscape, if I remember correctly. So that's basically a mountainous area where the sun is very present in the background. There's fog elements and VFX in the background, and all of the rock formations were made in a specific way that they would look very natural with a lot of interesting openings. The third one was a space environment. Obviously, we had to have one. So again, the sun is the most present thing in the background. Bunch of planets, bunch of asteroids, dust, space dust, and other enemies too. So having this art style not only helps us to make it look good, but also subtly communicate to the player what type of challenge they will be soon facing. So in those tunnel environments all the time, probably the player will be facing the challenge that they will need to fly through corridors. Landscapes, they'll need to collect stuff from the bottom of the floor, and space will be just for basically shooting. So having that, we really liked it, and we proceed further to game design. And we had those three environments. We wanted more, obviously. And our game designer, Adam, has suggested a couple new ones that were never present in the game. So one of them is a space station level. The background is space, obviously, but the environment itself was created in a way that would give an illusion that it has been made by an intelligent life form. So all of the edges are very clean. There's a lot of traps, a lot of doors. And the other environment was a battlefield. Again, space background, but the whole environment was flooded with remaining enemies on the floor, and the player is tasked to destroy each and every one of them. And not only that, we played a lot with controls. And Gravitar is a game where gravity actually is one of the most present things in the game. Usually it's pulling you towards the ground, but at some points it's pulling you towards the center of the screen, or in some cases there's just no gravity and you're battling against the thrust force of your own ship. So we had to find a cool way to approach the movement controls, and I think we did that well, just because the movement is very challenging at first, but it's very pleasing when you get used to that. Fighting against the forces of gravity. We added additional VFX for thrust rotation movements, so basically when the player turns to one or the other side, different thrusters turn on and off. And the environments themselves were another part of the challenge for the game. So each environment, as I mentioned, is a lot more expansive. We tried to create the environments that the player would take a while to fly around, unlock all secrets, and collect everything. And we did that intentionally. I remember very fondly one of the levels had a specific cave where the player has to activate a button inside of that cave. And inside of that cave, there's a bunch of enemies, and all of them are shielded. So the player must destroy the shield, destroy the enemies, and then activate the button if they want to be safe. Or they can be, of course, reckless, just fly in, do a very quick 360 and pick off a couple of enemies along the way and do that. So I know Jason really liked that level. So yeah, another pillar, the third one. And the third pillar is again, development and programming. So with the additional time we have requested for additional artwork and repurposing, like reimagining what a recharge title is, we also wanted to work on the code base because, as I initially mentioned, the code base was shared between all titles previously, and how we shared the title, how we shared the code base was basically just taking written code on one project and just moving it to another Unity project and creating another repository for that. And that worked initially, but we quickly found that we are running into a lot of issues with that because each time we're going into submissions, we're getting something that we need to fix. We do that, and there are a lot of other fixes or features we do, and eventually we lost track of what was done where, and trying to move them manually from repository to repository was just not feasible anymore. And what we did instead with Gravitar, we started working on a single Unity project and a single repository. And we were able to change the game from inside of the editor itself. And by having this shared code base, we are still able to make fixes to it, but those fixes are immediately applicable to all previous and future games, with the exception, of course, just having to rebuild everything once again, but it's a lot faster than before. And of course, the team is already set. They know how to work with each other, but there are still some bugs coming along. So, of course, we needed to work on our processes. So again, code reviews became a lot more important, and the cleanliness of the code. Our senior developer, Carlos, again, was reviewing and making pull requests, and all of the team members this time had to do pull requests and review each other's work before everything gets merged in. And for the porting side of the things, so we created specific implementations for each platform like we usually do, but this time the game itself recognizes which platform it's being run on and then apply specific changes to that, so like controller support or key bindings or key mappings or indications or stuff like that, so settings and etc. And yeah, again, I think we're pretty good at it now, definitely not perfect, but pretty good. By reviewing each other's code, we're able to avoid a lot of disasters moving along, and we're still continuing this on today. So what was the reception for Gravitar? It seems great. The players really liked it. They definitely initially mentioned that the game started feeling stale, that the artwork looks similar and the gameplay is almost the same. And this was definitely a fresh new look for the Recharge titles. And the great reception, not only at users level, but at reviews level and at Atari as well, gave us a lot more confidence to try out something new and something different. Not always, but at some degrees. And I think I would say this was one of our more fun games to play. Definitely try it out if you haven't. And yeah, in summary, I told you about how we start a project and we didn't know at first what we were doing, and how we break down the game into smaller chunks so we could work on it on a manageable way. I told you an SDK issue about an SDK issue we had last year, and how an open and honest line of communication with the client helps us to find solutions to problems that seem impossible. I told you about a feature we had that wasn't really fitting our game design philosophy, but how we, by thinking outside the box, we could flip it in a way that we created something even more and something more engaging. And lastly, I told you about how doing the same thing for a very long time started getting stale for the players, and how we got inspired by the classic gameplay, and how it gave us the courage to try out something new. This is the team. The team has gotten a lot bigger and a lot smaller over the years in some situations. So I hope my talk gives you the inspiration to approach the challenges in your games in a more courageous and more outside of the box way. And lastly, of course, I hope that the games you all are making right now will leave a lasting impression on the people that play your games, even for multiple years in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Tadas. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I really enjoy how you reinvented the old school aesthetics from 80s, even 70s, how you feel it, rethink and refeel it with like those themed colors and schemas, with the vibes of old TVs and screens.
Yeah.
Really, really dig it. So, time for Q&A. Someone got the question, please?
Yeah, did you have any performance issues?
Of course we did. We always do. Usually the performance issues arise from the amount of VFX we use, or basically something that we missed during like implementation phase. So at one of the games, we have imported assets that were basically all of them in layers, and instead of having it merged as a single unit, because we didn't really need them as separate layers, because we weren't animating specific parts. We needed very little, but each single element was a single layer, and that exploded the draw calls amount, as well as the game itself had a lot of bullets, because there was a lot of shooting and a lot of explosions and a lot of VFX. So yeah, we experienced a lot of performance issues. So we had to, we didn't really catch that until we started porting and we launched the game on Switch, on VCS, or on other consoles. I think even Linux was really showing us that there are performance issues. So yeah. And
thank you. That's it? Thank you. Please, next question.
Unity DOS? Dots? I am not sure about that. I would have to ask my developers for that, but I don't think so. I never heard of that. Probably not.
Okay, thank you. Question, actually, I've been thinking for a while. Looks like the majority of developers these days uses Unity for development. Are there any meaningful or worth mentioning alternatives, actually, for developers?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Are there alternatives to Unity?
Alternatives? I mean, of course, there are definitely multiple alternatives, but in our studio, usually we use Unity because that's what we got used to over the years, and all of our developers have been working on that. Of course, we have a branch of developers that started working on other engines, but as we are a studio that is more focused on outsourcing our developers to other studios, we adapt to what engine they are using. And usually what it came to was Unity was the most popular at the time. Now we're getting a bit more other engines in the pipeline.
Which one, for instance?
Unreal, Godot, I think. Can't remember all of them. I think there are several others that I'm not really able to mention.
Yeah, I believe Unreal 5 will be a really game changer for the whole industry.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Please. Wait for the mic. Wait a sec.
Thank you for the talk. Question is, do you have a original code of games which you are trying to remake?
Yeah, we don't. I think that's just lost to time. What we have from the originals was the artwork and the music and sound effects at the time. Unfortunately, we don't have the code. It would be very interesting to dig through that and see what they did at the time, but no, we don't, unfortunately.
Okay, and the last question is, I didn't get what responsibility of your shared SDK in between games. What SDK is responsible for?
Yeah, so SDKs are usually responsible for porting. So when we are porting to a specific platform, the platform themselves gives us an SDK, so we would be able to interpret their console and basically run the games on their consoles. Without it, that would probably be impossible or extremely hard. I have no idea how would we do that, but usually that's what we use those SDKs for, specifically for the porting side. And specifically that story I mentioned about the PlayStation SDK, that's when probably, I don't remember exactly, but I think that was when PlayStation 5 dropped. And they wanted for the developers to support PlayStation 5 SDK as well as PlayStation 4. So that's when we had to adapt quickly, and we weren't that quick.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Next question. Please, wait for the mic.
Thank you for the talk. And the question is, you mentioned there was a lot of shared code between the games. But from what I know, the games are very different. Can you provide some examples of what code was shared between them?
Yeah. So we specifically chose to share the code which is not linked to the gameplay itself. So that's basically the implementation of all of the UI. So all 4 games have the same UI. We have some visual tools that we have written. So for example, all games, first 4 games were featuring some sort of color switching. So all of that logic came through music. What we did with music is basically our sound designer, Megan McDuffie, has split each soundtrack into 5 or 6 layers. And depending on the gameplay, we add on top different layers to give a sense that basically the game is getting a bit more tense. So the whole logic of that, all of the porting implementations and all of the tools are basically something that we can transfer. Usually we just need to, the changes we need to do are basically connect different leaderboards, map the appropriate controls there, and we're almost good to go. So settings is also something usually that we share across the games. Usually we just take out the setting that's related to controlling of something, so movement of some sort or button mapping. Usually we have in settings some visual settings, music, and language settings, which are obviously very easy to reuse and not necessarily needed to be rewritten every time. So that's some examples. I don't remember all of that, which we reused.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. More questions, please? That's it. I think I have a final question for you. So I'm a startup owner, and as someone involved in the programming, I know how difficult it is to maintain the, say, quality of the code base, especially when you have to support like multiple platforms. So the question is, what was your approach for Q&A and testing? Are there in existence any like automated tests for game industry?
I am not sure about automated tests because we're not using that. We have several QA engineers in our team that are constantly in communication with the development team. Usually what we have done were, as I mentioned, 4 games on the same code base usually brings up a lot of same ideas, same issues. So we created additional QA documentation, a checklist basically of which parts needs to go through QA. There are several other basically suggestions from the console owners themselves in the forums, which they are recommending to check specific parts. Unfortunately, I'm unable to disclose that without breaking NDAs, but they give a lot of insights on that. And Yeah, usually it's a learning process throughout the whole journey. So eventually still something slips through. So we look at that basically and just add it to our QA checklist if we still need to, if we're able to test it. So basically some things like, I don't know, something specific on only the dashboard side of the console is not something that we can look at. Usually we deliver builds and then hands off there. But in some cases it's just build numbers, check if the build numbers each submission are updated, check the, I don't know, if changing the language fits in every language on a certain space of the screen, and a bunch of little things. So we try to document all of our findings as much as possible and go from there.
Yeah, thank you, makes sense. So thank you, it was Tadas Migauskas, producer of SneakyBox, and he was telling us about classic games and challenges of recharting them for modern times. Applause.
Thank you.